Hey. Well, so nice to hear everybody speaking so excitedly about this book. So we are just going to do chapters 1 to 9 tonight. Is there anything that people want to just say right off the hop, or shall we just work through it kind of one chapter at a time?
I never went and looked back at this story of Cupid and Psyche.
Okay,
Were you going to start there?
no,
No. I was just curious if you had like to compare it to the story that he's
no, no,
retelling.
I've never read it.
No.
I've only read this.
I think the only comment I had to say to start was Psyche to me was like created all the emotions Frodo Baggins created over his large novels of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
In like such a short time.
Okay.
Like went from like the hero to the problem to the sacrifice to the like you feel sorry for them. And all those emotions that Frodo causes you over those 5 books in like such a short period. And I was like kind of amazed by Psyche character. Like Frodo to me is like one of the best ever well-written characters, well thought out. And he portrayed that character in Psyche in such a short book. And I was like, not all I'd say is like how incredibly well Psyche was like just put out.
Nice. Great. Others?
Well, the first time I read his books, and it took me a while to get used to what he's trying to do.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. But now you're used to it.
As I progress, it started to make a bit more sense. But the first 2 chapters, I almost put it down.
Okay. You almost quit.
Yep.
Don't give up on us, Humbert. All right. So, chapter 1, we have Oriel, this woman of Glome, a princess, writing this this book, which is really a complaint. So she says on the first page, I will accuse the gods, especially the god who lives on the Grey Mountain. And so she has a complaint, but she recognizes that there's no judge. So this is kind of like the therapist's suggestion, write the letter, but don't send it to the person. So, but she does imagine a Greek person. Greeks are viewed to be very wise, to be of the world. And in that wisdom, they themselves may have the ability to judge between her and the gods. And possibly because the fox is the typical kind of Greek that she knows. And he doesn't really believe in the gods, although he might believe in them more than he says. She may feel that he has the ability to do the judgment.
Is Fox actually a fox, or is that just his name?
That's just his name.
Oh,
It's
okay.
because he has red in his beard before it turns all white. Yeah.
That confused me at first. I was like, is she talking about like a wild, like it's
Yeah.
because it's Greek mythology, you never know if
Absolutely.
it's like a fox that walks around like a dog, a pet dog. I didn't know if it was like
no, this is a man, so he's a slave captured in the wars, and he would have surrendered himself, and he's brought to the king of Glome to serve as a slave. The god of the Grey Mountain is the son of Ungit. Ungit is the female deity, goddess. And notice that it's who the Greeks would call Aphrodite. So Ungit is Aphrodite, although while there's parallels in the different mythologies, there would be some character differences between them, but largely this is the category Ungit and Aphrodite would be the same. So we have the gray god of the mountain is the son of Ungit.
Bruce, was that his name? Or is it
No,
just-
he's so shadow monster, the brute, the god. These are interchangeable ways to talk about the same entity, the god of the gray mountain.
Seemed like Fox was a realist. Like he didn't like believe in the garbage of a god. He would like
Right.
always have a reasonable explanation for everything. Even like
Yes.
starting from the beginning.
Yeah.
He was very like realistic and like, hey, it's probably just thieves or something that are like
Right.
making it an evil place. or
Right,
something.
right. So that's a good place to start. So we've been reading Lewis and we've been reading about Lewis now with Surprised by Joy. And part of Lewis's history is he was materialist. So part of his atheism centered around this. There's only the material world that we see. There's no metaphysics, as it were, after the natural. And so in some ways the fox represents that part of Lewis, I would say. It's a closed system. And really, for the fox, this talk of gods, that's barbarian speech, so uneducated, unwise, and it's superstition. It is the work of poets. And so the fox knows better, and he is brought on board to teach the daughters of the king until a son should be born about this. We get to see there's a difference between the two sisters, Redivel and Oriel. Redivel is considered to have beauty, golden curls, whereas Oriel, we start to get the sense is not highly regarded for her beauty.
Is the king, would he be like, it seems like he's frustrated with the fact that he doesn't have a son, but would he be considered a bad king or just a bad father? Like I was reading the book and I'm like, had mixed of like, yeah, maybe they're in a drought or having struggles like making food, but that necessarily make him like a bad king, or is he just a bad father?
Well, it all depends on what we mean by bad. So from the point of view of the population, everything, it's a worldview, everything is connected to the gods, right?
Yeah.
And the royal family is said to have the blood of the gods in them. So kings and queens, even today, represent the deity, right? So to some degree, the king represents the deity. So if there's something wrong, if everything's falling apart around his ears, and we have famine, we have pestilence, we have war, and we have a certain type of barrenness. So there's no son, which means there's potentially no future for the lineage.
Yeah.
Right? Because depending on where you're at, girls may not count in those regards.
Yeah.
And so as the people look at that, they would say there's something wrong here, right? So think of the book of Job. Job's friends, as everything is falling down around Job's ears, say, despite your claims of having not committed any sin, you must have sinned because God is not unjust, right? If these things are happening to you, it's for a reason. The best thing you can do is, even if you can't figure out what you did, just repent. Just say that you're a sinner, repent, get things fixed up in your life, can get back on track. So it's the same kind of thing here.
I just wondered because like, are you talking about like Job, like in the book of wisdom? But then you look at Ecclesiastes and it talks about like, hey, even if you do the right thing, all the wrong
Right.
things can happen to you.
Right.
But it kind of it's demonstrating him in a matter of like, hey, he kind of treats his daughters wrong, but out of frustration that he doesn't have any sons. That's kind of like in Ecclesiastes, like even when you have all the wrong things happen to you, you could still be doing all the right things. And it seemed like he wasn't like a terrible king necessarily, or a terrible person. It's just frustration, anger, and all the wrong things happened to him.
Well, and again, I think we could make an argument that he was not a good king from within the world of his story, right? So we find out that really his anger reflects the things that he's frightened of or doesn't really understand. Women are a part of that. And so the wisest thing that he does is he involves the Greek in his court, and then his daughter Oriel, because she's quite intelligent as well.
And enough to war.
Yeah. So so that is some wisdom, but he himself does not seem to have very much wisdom.
Yeah.
And as you're picking up on, from a character standpoint, his willingness to just give Psyche over without any kind of a fight, just to save himself, like when he thought they were coming for him, he's ready to scrap.
I just wonder, like, if you put yourself in the context of him, is it an honorable thing to give up his daughter to the gods? Because like back then, like, I mean, Jesus is different because he told us you don't have to sacrifice children to like receive honor. You don't have to, like, kings aren't the embodiment of God. Like, we all have pieces of God. But back then, if you were to say a king like honorably gave up their child, like maybe that's a positive thing in their eyes of like,
So
willing to be good and honorable as a king.
well, within the context of the story, that willingness and the context of this particular people group, yeah, his willingness to give his daughter to sacrifice in order to bring peace with the gods and recovery to the land.
Yeah.
Kind of like Spock, right? The needs of the one are exceeded by the needs of the many.
Yeah.
I didn't put that right.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the
one, or of the few, or of the one. That's it. Thank you.
And it was also her sister that actually stirred things up to begin with, because she was jealous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And she was the one who'd been going to visit the goddess and talking to the priest about her sister.
Yes.
The curse.
So
But she didn't intend it to go quite that far.
yeah. And again, we want to, Redeville has a certain jealousy, right? She went from having relationship with her sister, and it was kind of the two of them together. And then when the fox comes, there's a division there. And then when Psyche comes, there's a further division there. And Redeville suddenly finds herself on the outside. And really her greatest companion becomes Bata, who is not herself a good woman. And so a new formation starts for Redeville. So that's not to justify what she did, but I think it's helpful to keep in mind within the story itself, there's always formation happening, right?
Oral or whatever it is and Rivendell, do they have the same mother that died?
Yeah.
And then Psyche has the same mother, has a different mother that passed away. Okay.
Yeah. 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 So Psyche's a stepsister.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually a half sister. Stepsister would be married in with the family.
It's definitely a structured world, like when Psyche's born, no one in the house went to bed on the night of the birth. For that, they say will make the child refuse to wake into the world. Like with that world of it's all cause and effect with the gods, it's definitely a structure.
Yes. Yes.
Super structured world.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And for a long time, that's how the world was. right? Like predominantly that was the worldview. You're always kind of everything you do, you don't want to notice your own happiness too much, right? You don't want to sound like you're boasting because you never know when the gods are going to break out against you, right? And that's an important distinction because we tend to think, well, one, we think about God, singular, as opposed to the gods. We also tend to put God kind of away up there, disinterested most of the time in who and what we are. But in this world, the gods are all around us. The gods are paying attention. And so they are different than us, right? So there's something frightening about them. And you get the same sense when you read, I'm going to say fairy tales, but I don't mean Little Red Riding Hood. I mean, when you get into like George MacDonald's fantasies, the Fae is kind of this magical type of creature. It's not mortal like us. Think of Midsummer's Night's Dream. You have the fairies there, and Oberon gives command to Puck, and Puck carries it out, right? And you have this sudden twist of fate, and everything is turned upside down. There's a man with an ass's head, like they're in our world, but they function differently. And so you have to be careful. So fairy tales were about being careful when you go to the place where you may encounter those things, because they don't function like we function. So the gods are very similar to that, right? They're not like us. And because of that, you're never quite sure what they're going to do, because they might not even be trying to do harm. And yet your whole world could be flipped upside down in a second. Okay? So we also have in this chapter this story about Aphrodite falling in love with a mortal. And then that mortal finding out that he had slept with a goddess, and he says, kill me at once. And this is informative, right? For one thing, begins to foreshadow what's coming. But again, it illustrates what we were just talking about, how you can never quite be sure. You're never quite safe with the gods working around you.
There's a bit of a clue of the fox too, that he does love the poetry, but it has a shamed relationship to it.
Yes, yes, which he thinks can be cured with earlier education. You know, I learned the truth too late.
Like later in the book, it says like the god and I forget what it's called, the god of Anapith, whatever.
Okay.
Like the god that she rises up from the ground.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you have to serve and like feed her.
Yeah.
Like a planter almost.
Oh, yes.
And it
Yeah.
kind of seems like our like opposite to what I guess a Christian would believe. Like God doesn't expect you to like serve her, else she'll destroy you and like eat your crops and cause famine and stuff. And it seems like they're kind of held to like this perfection to serve it.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because to some degree, that's a particular worldview that you're looking at it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody, let's say we were able to lift a character out of this book and put them into our world, they may very well see what's happening. And actually, when COVID hit, what was one of the first response? Is this God's judgment?
Yeah.
right? A lot of people were having that conversation. Now, you might answer that differently. I might answer that differently, but we're not wholly separated from this kind of a set of thinking, right? So in some ways, it depends on your own theology. Where you start is going to depend on where you finish.
Yeah.
Well, Oriel, page 13 of mine, comes to know that she is ugly for the first time, or clearly understanding it. There's a fear of her stepmother. And she realizes that she needn't, because that woman is afraid. And I thought, you're talking early about Lewis's talent in writing Psyche's character. I thought when it says, I know now that the face I saw was beautiful, but I did not think of that then. All I saw was that she was frightened, more frightened than I, indeed terrified. It made me see my father as he must have looked to her a moment since, when she had her first sight of him standing to greet her in the porch. His was not a brow, a mouth, a girth, a stance, or a voice to quiet a girl's fears. I thought that was wonderfully written, because here we have this young woman who is in a different country, a different palace now, and she's facing a much older man, and he's brutal looking, and she's about to be stripped down and left with him.
Is that the stepmother?
Yeah. In the final line of the chapter, we had sung very badly.
Yeah.
Kind of seems like how like just that vulnerability and like that kind of like air in the head, I would say, in a way of like kind of not understanding anything, kind of like reflects onto Psyche, because you can tell she's kind of got like this like when she was like, oh my gosh, why are people saying I'm accursed and stuff? I thought I was healing them. You kind of tell she's got a little bit of the best word I describe, like a little air in the head, like
Okay.
little oblivious to
So
the
I
real
would
world.
describe that maybe as naivety.
Naive, yeah,
Yeah.
or vulnerable to like maybe she's kind of pent up in the palace and doesn't really isn't maybe she doesn't have like that street credibility. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's been raised in a very sheltered
Yeah, and
kind
it
of
kind of
way.
reflects on her stepmother's kind of similar. It kind of seems like she was maybe sheltered and
Yeah.
vulnerability, and all of a sudden she's faced with the challenge or like an uncomfortable different situation to how she was raised and kind of in shock, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that there would be much to prepare you for that moment.
I think it's interesting that a man wrote even those words, that chapter, because, for me, he really got what it would feel like to be that young girl who's basically been politically sacrificed.
Right.
Which happened all the time. It
And
still
happens.
happens.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
still happens. Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a woman's perspective of how it would feel.
Right. Right.
It's completely different to the older sister. Like when the man comes to like, I'm gonna marry the queen of this land. She's like, well, you gotta fight my best champion. And then she walks out onto the field. Like, I mean, that's later in the story, but
Yeah.
just complete contrast of character.
Yes.
Like, I'm not gonna she's unwillingness to be vulnerable, the veil constantly covering her face, like
Right.
complete opposite of like unwillingness to be the vulnerable, like I'm not gonna get taken advantage of, like Psyche did.
Well, and again, we have this formation, right? This opinion of those around her that she's ugly. And we see, I don't know if it's, maybe I exceeded the chapters. I did exceed the chapter, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be speaking out of a place that you might not have read up to yet.
Spoiler alert.
But she actually
Oh.
talks about once a woman is found ugly, then she becomes treated like a man, right? And so there is a formation piece there. Even for Oriel's self-understanding, she has concluded she's ugly. And so she's taken herself out of that game of trying to utilize that power. And I think that's a helpful way to think about it, right? Like I kind of did a series a number of years ago called Heroes. And we kind of looked at the women of the Bible, some really heroic characters, and they had to use different type of power than what men traditionally use in order to survive and thrive in the world. And I think, here too, Redivel is exercising a power. Psyche, to some degree, is exercising a power, and Oriel is also exercising a power. And it's just a part of the way that they can get through the world, right?
Yeah.
Even the stepmother is exercising a certain amount of power, even in her vulnerability.
Yeah.
So it's different types of power. And yeah, so Oriel, I think she concludes early on in life, beauty and attraction is not a power that I can use. And she starts to develop other areas. And because those around her, including her father, see her as ugly, they can't utilize her in those same ways. And so they treat her differently as well. So Bardia's willingness to train her in sword, to recognize her gifts with that, would have never done that with Psyche or Redival, not just because of temperament, but because you might mar the beauty.
Yeah.
And that's the asset.
Yeah. I guess kind of reminds me, I've read a lot of books about Elizabeth the First, like the Queen, and she's kind of my personal like hero that I look up to a lot, even though that's a long time ago that she was alive. Someone I look up to a lot. And Oriel gave me lots of like similar stories of like, I know I'm not the most beautiful woman ever.
Yeah.
But Queen Elizabeth I was a very balanced politique, balancing religion and politics and not confusing them, but kind of that idea of like, I'm gonna hold myself to purity, and I know I'm not the most beautiful woman in the land, but I'm gonna hold myself in a strong character form and like guide my country into like, it says how many good things she changed.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna like step back and know I'm not like my pretty younger sister Victoria, or for her Psyche, and I'm gonna be like a strong, powerful character and like use those traits of being a strong character.
There's probably lots of legitimacy to that observation. One of Lewis's favorite books, and we saw it in Surprised by Joy, is The Fairy Queen. And The Fairy Queen was written by Spencer, and that was to and about ultimately Elizabeth I.
Oh, I did not know that.
Well, you're here to learn, my friend. You've just learned something. Okay, so as we go into chapter 2, let's see here. Oh, so we have this moment where the birth of Psyche is happening. The priest is there. And already we have Oriel's view on some of these things, right? She's terribly afraid. And there's also this smell, right? The smell of slaughtering, blood on the floor. The priest is cleaning his holy knife. So there's this already in our main character's point of view, there's this attachment between that which is holy and that which is horrific. They kind of go hand in hand for her and through her for us.
The priest is kind of similar to the fox. In
Yeah.
the way of he's like weirdly not very spiritual as a priest. Like I mean,
Yes, I'm doing my,
I'm thinking about like even the example of when he was like Psyche needs to go up to the mountain. It wasn't like he was like, we must satisfy the gods or anything. He's like, yeah, she's cursed. Like you need to just send her up there and get her out of here.
Right.
And it seemed like even in this instance, like the priest talks a little bit. And whenever he talks back to the king, he's just not afraid to like
Right.
talk back to the king.
Yeah, yeah.
And it seems like he's very non-spiritual compared to what I would think of a priest back then.
Right.
Like, oh, I worship the gods. I
Yeah.
humble myself. I'm like a monk. I shave my head. Like he just seemed very like I walk into the palace and just boss around the
Right.
king and like
So in some ways, the fox and the priest of Unget are two sides of the same coin, or maybe polar opposites, right?
yeah.
For the fox, it's all wisdom, sophistry, right? It's all the life of the mind, it's ideas, and even, you know, I think if you were going to talk about from a spiritual point of view, he would probably talk about the absolute, you know, some of the things
Yeah.
that Lewis has talked about. And the priest is all action. It's all right. You know, it's not so much important to think right about Ungit as it is to worship right, to
Yeah.
do right, right?
Yeah. It felt like he was very not almost not maybe emotional about it. Very just like
Right.
this is a straightforward action. Like when you have a child slaughter a lamb, when
Yeah.
this happens, this needs to happen. When you have famine, you need to do this.
Yes.
It was like very much like it was not what I expected was like you have to do with your heart. And like that's what I would imagine a
Right.
priest in this sort of like Greek sort of mythology, or from what I've read of Greek mythology, but this priest is not like that at all.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, and this is a much it's closer to Babylonian, so it's much bloodier.
Yeah.
You know, the Greek gods often, you know, it's food offerings, drink offerings, and that kind of stuff. This is child sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. This is
Mhm.
blood offering. So there is a qualitative difference to it
Yeah.
that we're probably unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
But it's not divorced from belief, right? This priest doesn't just believe, he knows. He's 100% in this world. He is aware of how the world works, and he knows what right action is, and that we must take it, and there's no avoiding it.
Yeah.
Right. And so because of that, we see a little later on, there's a strength to him that the king doesn't have.
Mhm.
Although Oreo recognizes the same kind of conviction and psyche
Mhm.
that the priest has.
Yeah. He kind of reminds me of like what I would picture an Old Testament priest from like the descendant of Levites, right?
Yeah.
Of like, okay, you got to build your house this way, you got to eat this way, you got to like
Yes.
raise your children this way. It's like
Yeah.
624 rules, slam it down.
Yep.
Plus the other ratings they had outside that we don't have the Bible, but you know, slam all whatever 900 rules it is and slam in your face. You got to do it this way, and that's how you're gonna become a good to your God. You know, that's kind of how I imagine the priest being.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of jolt, there's not a joy, like there's all holy and horror are always together. I mean, like the temple and stuff, like
Well-
it's sort of a jolt to our,
Oh, yeah.
would not even look forward to going to the. It's always a fear aspect, smell of blood.
Right. So number of years ago, there's a book called let me just pull it up. Caring for words in a culture of lies. Something like that. Oh boy. Anyways, the author there makes the point that we have bastardized our words quite a bit. All right. Yeah, caring for words in a culture of lies. And one of those words that we do that to is the word awesome. So we, you know, somebody does a stunt or, oh, that's awesome, right? But awe was reserved for the gods or for God, right? Awesome was a description of God himself. He is awesome. And so, when we talk, again, we tend to think about Jesus is my buddy, right? Like give him a noogie kind of thing. There's not a lot of holy fear attached to it. There's not a lot of investment in awe today for God. We have worked very hard at bringing God close. The result of that, we've lost some of that awe, right? Think of Israel when they're in the wilderness. God is on the mountain and it is just red with fire and it's rumbling and there are earthquakes and there's flames and lightning breaking out and the people have drawn close, by command. And they finally, they say to Moses, look, you talk to him on our behalf. We're just going to hang back here because we touch this holy, he may break out and we may die, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of holy fear is there. We've lost that. So yeah, you're quite right. It is jolting. And this, when we have this, this is awe, right? There's a holiness, there's a horror to it. Again, because it's different than us, it is other, and it's fearsome.
Mhm.
And even more fearsome because there's this call for blood. There's this, this is how it's human blood. It's, for the Israelites, they had this sacrifice system that rather than your child, it's this goat or these pigeons or, whatever. There's a way to kind of buy back the death of your child. So no son, just another daughter. And Oreo would like to take off with the fox, but cooler heads prevail.
It doesn't even seem like it's in Oreo's mind that it's like a possibility I could be queen. Like
Right.
at a young age, like she does end up, but it doesn't even seem like it's like a feasible possibility. Like it's not even she's like, oh, I had another sister. There's a possibility,
Right.
which is kind of weird to me. Like she ended up, but if I was like the eldest child, boy or girl, I would think, hey, there's a legitimate possibility that I would end up in like taking over for my dad. And it seems like, oh, I had another girl. It almost seems like, well, he's kind of getting old now, but he hasn't had a son yet. Like this is kind of a possibility in the realm of my world.
Well, I think that would have to do with the education or lack thereof that she has received at this point.
Oh, okay.
Also, I'm not sure if for these people, a woman can rule. I know that she does fill the throne later
Only 'cause
on.
their dad's really sick, though, right?
Yeah. So, yeah. But I would say from the character within the story itself, that's a reflection of her lack of education, right? And to some degree, the storyteller's choice. I mean, you can't focus on all the details, so.
Yeah.
So we have the introduction of Aistra or Psyche. Fair skin, a little bit like, almost like Snow White, that fair skin. And so we get the sense of Psyche's beauty. Even the fox says her beauty almost makes him believe in the idea that this family has God's blood in them. because she's so beautiful. He describes her as a Helen, kind of reborn. Helen, of course, started the Trojan War for her beauty. And we see Oriole begins to turn outward a bit more. The fox was kind of an inward resource. Psyche is an outward object of affection for Oriole. And so I just want us to remember some of Lewis's theology, right? Great divorce. We even saw it with Surprise by Joy. To turn outward is the beginning of turning toward God. So we begin to have this love for Psyche, which begins already to transform Oriole, and it transformed her world, right? Laughter becomes a part of her world.
Purpose. Also, she has a purpose.
Yes, that's right.
Do the kings, like in the story, actually have God's blood within them, or is it just kind of like the theory of the kings that have deity blood through them? Because like it seems like Psyche has like attributes of Aphrodite within her, like the healing and the beauty and stuff.
Well, there's nothing within the story that can confirm or deny it, other than the story itself that's unfolding.
Yeah.
As you say, may give some indications that there's something to this. Yeah.
But if we're telling when the fox is talking about her, the beauty of her, and then characteristics speak words of better only grandfather.
Right. Yeah. And again,
Maybe
that's
wisdom
part of that. You
before
don't
her
want to
age or-
draw the attention of the gods to your happiness,
Yeah.
because the gods can be jealous, right? Mortals receiving affection rather than them. And again, we have all springs and summers. So Lewis's holiday off of term is here. So I wanted to be a wife so that I could have been her real moon. I wanted to be a boy so that she could be in love with me. I wanted her to be my full sister instead of my half sister. I wanted her to be a slave so that I could set her free and make her rich. So this is this overflowing of love, this desire for, she's already a sister, but an even deeper, more secure connection, which may be both beautiful and troubling. And early on, Psyche has this idea that she's going to be a great queen, married to the greatest king of all, and will build a castle of gold and amber at the top of the mountain.
Oh, that
Then the fox just had to go and jinx it all.
Yeah.
I would say that makes more sense. I kind of forgot that part because when the fox later in the story talks about how Psyche used to dream of those things as a kid,
Yeah.
I kind of was like, oh, good thing Fox knew that part, and then
Mhm.
didn't realize they told us actually she did dream of that idea.
So the fox says the divine nature is not like that. So he does have some idea of metaphysics after nature. A divine nature is not like that. It has no envy. Whatever he said, I knew it is not good to talk that way about Ungit. Again, there's a sense of the fox knows a lot, but he might not know Ungit all that well. So chapter 3, we have Rediville is a danger here. And so Redeville is messing around with a soldier who gets castrated, becoming a eunuch. And now they are saddled with having Redeville within their sight. They are now responsible for her.
Like the soldier was,
Who?
or
What's
like that was made a eunuch is now in charge of Redeville.
No, Oriole and the fox
Oh,
are in charge of Redeville.
watching over her.
And because of that, because the jealousy is now internal, and she has no love for Psyche, it's not great. So there's some deep jealousy there. And we have this little tableau that Redeville hit Psyche. Next thing, Oriole knows she's on top of her, covered in blood because she's been slapping her and has her hands around her throat. So this is a deep love that she has for little Psyche.
A lot of violence, like the king grabbing the girls by the hair and hucking them, and like,
Yes.
Mhm.
seems
Yes.
very, I don't know, aggressive.
Yeah. Well, no participation ribbons are being handed out.
No.
Here. And we begin to have the decline of the nation. We have the first of the bad harvest. The king trying to marry into a marriage that is going to improve the political circumstances of the nation. It doesn't. And then we have this moment of finding out that Psyche has been worshipped. A sense of becoming a goddess. And Psyche, in her naivete, goes ahead and kisses babies, and
Doesn't she go and like heal people supposedly?
she does, while people come and demand that they send her out. And so we find out that she has this habit of doing these things. And so there's this deep fear, right? There's jealousy. And there may be a connection. We don't know. Is there a connection between these bad harvests and the lack of political gain because Psyche accepted this sort of worship? Is this cause and effect? Is this simply correlation? We don't know. But we do know both are happening. So from the Greek philosophy, gods are not jealous. From the Gloam philosophy, oh yes, they are.
Gloam, is that like, that's just a word playing on gloomy? Like, is that like, or does it actually have meaning like glow?
I don't know if it's a historical place. I would think that it probably is, just because so much of this seems to be set in a historical reality, but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's almost a hint now that when the fox is talking about the divine nature is without jealousy. But at first she says, oh, it's dangerous, dangerous, said I. The gods are jealous. They can't bear. And he breaks in, daughter, it doesn't matter a straw, said the fox. The divine nature is without jealousy. Those gods, the sort of gods you're always thinking about, are all folly and lies of poets. We have discussed this 100 times. So it's almost like Fox is talking about a different God.
Right.
I just realized that now. That didn't click before.
Yeah, so he does not believe in the gods. He wants to speak about, yeah, this kind of force, this amorphous thing, which is probably closer to Lewis's great mind than
Right.
it is to And because it's the idea of human wisdom amped up to a God size, why would there be jealousy, right? There's only logic. And it's illogical, as Mr. Spock would tell you, to be jealous.
Is Lewis trying to write this to like hint that like Jesus and God exist within the story? Or is this like
No.
not even close?
No, he's not trying to put Jesus and God in this story,
Yeah.
although he does want us to think about
Because
faith
the very ending,
through this.
yeah, because the very ending almost made me wonder, is he tried to hint, like very ending of
La
like
la 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 la.
like kind of made me think, is he trying to point at him? Or
Yes,
he
is.
is trying to point.
Yeah. This whole thing is about Christian faith.
Yeah,
That's why he's retelling a Greek myth.
yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But it's not like trying to directly be like, here's Jesus.
Nope.
But Fox is just saying divine nature
No.
instead of the name Jesus.
That's right. No,
Okay.
that's not happening.
Okay.
But he does want us to think about God, and he does want us to think about matters of faith, and he does want us to think about the relationship between us and God, and to see what he might describe as the Christ myth. And when he uses the word myth in that instance, he doesn't mean a made-up story that isn't true, but rather a narrative that helps us to understand reality and how it functions. So he definitely wants us to hear that, right? Sacrifice of Psyche on a tree is meant to point to Jesus and the cross, right? There's
Yeah.
something about this willing sacrifice of Psyche, and her perfection, her innocence is all part of it, right? Even the relationship between, is it Ungit? Is it her son, the shadow monster, the gray god, or the god of the gray mountain? Sometimes it's Ungit if it's a male victim, sometimes it's the brute if it's a female victim, right?
Yeah,
And is it victim, is it consumption, or is it bridal?
yeah,
It's a consummation, right?
yeah.
And so, yeah, he wants us to play on all those themes and hear the Christian faith through it. But so there's a poem that says, tell all the truth, but tell it slant.
Yeah.
So that's what he's doing. He's telling the truth, but he's telling it slant. But he's not trying to import Jesus in terms of he's really hiding behind this kind of thing. That makes sense. Okay, so Ridevel now has power. And so she's able to kind of blackmail them, make herself happy. We want to keep moving, just it's 8 o'clock now. Okay, so she's thrust outside. And again, we have this sense of healing in her hands there. And she's ready to sacrifice herself for love of the people, right? She's doing this for good reasons. Whereas the king is risking her for his own reasons.
Satisfy the people.
And some died, some recovered. Only the gods know if those who recovered were those whom Psyche had touched, and gods do not tell. But the people have no doubts. They are putting out sacrifices or offerings. This is not good in Oriel's world. The fox is not worried about Ungit, but he is worried about the priest. So he's a realist. Recognizes this might be a problem. So in chapter 4, then, people are wanting grain. Oriel has been working for her father while the fox has been recovering from his illness of the plague. And Ridavale has begun going to the temple. And again, the jealousy has continued. And so we have this this moment where Psyche learns that despite her good intentions, she has been come to viewed as the accursed. Again, if we're looking at the Christian faith through this retelling of this story, then again we see Jesus here, right? The shadow of the cross falls across Jesus's story. Jesus moves from the blessed one, the anointed one, Messiah, to sacrifice, right? He is cursed for our sake. And so Psyche also is cursed. We also get a sense from Psyche that Oriel can mimic her father's temper and looks from time to time. And she begins to have this dread, this foreboding that ruin is going to fall on them. Things continue to go worse in Glome. People are becoming more desperate. And now comes the priest of Ungit to the king's house. So there's political questions. He's coming with the temple guards. Is this meant to be a coup? Is he going to try and depose the king? So we have this moment of the priest arriving in the room, the smell of old age and the smell of the oils and essences they put on those girls, and the Ungit smell filled the room. It became very holy.
Yeah, it is and their like wings and bird masks, they would have been quite the sight.
Yes, yes. The painted
Yeah.
temple prostitutes. Yeah. So the priest comes and he lists the woes, and the king is worried that he's coming after him. And the king, he says, "Look, I do all the sacrificing. Why are you blaming me?" kind of thing. But is no longer an animal sacrifice that will remedy this situation. Rather, a person needs to be given. So again, if we're looking at the gospel through this lens, that animal sacrifices were instead of the people of Israel, but ultimately human life is what's needed, right? In the day that you eat of the fruit, you shall die. You shall surely die. Our death has to be exchanged, right? Ultimately, it has to be somebody that is not deserving of death dies in our stead, right? So that's part of our own narrative, our own gospel. And so we have that here as well. That's foreshadowed in the Genesis 22, Abraham and Isaac. It's significant that Jesus doesn't pretend to be human. He's fully human, and he lays his life down as a human, that he gives up his life and goes obediently to death, and death on a cross.
There's definitely a logic in that, like to the curse. You're like, oh yeah, those are some bad things those people did.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like you don't feel bad for them.
Right?
Incest, murder, like yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like he is like, I mean, most stories that are nonfiction would have like a larger in life character that like kind of not even necessarily sees it in the broader term, but is willing to be a larger in life character. And it's like he kind of embodies that whole idea of like, I'm gonna try my best here, didn't work, and I'll just keep giving myself up selflessly until it all gets fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of almost like even in the last scene of her going up the hill, you can kind of, she's not crying and stuff. She's kind of like sitting in her room, and then they come and take her, and she's just kind of like that dead straightforward, like, this is just what has to happen. Like my life is worthless compared to all those outside the kingdom.
Although we do
Versus-
find out that she was drugged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do find that out, but it's kind of different from the king who's kind of like keep them out of the castle versus she's like, how can I help people outside the castle? It's kind of contrast of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Almost.
So in this conversation, the priest or the king is asking questions, and the priest says the victim must be given to the brute, for the brute is in a mystery, Ungit herself or Ungit's son, the god of the mountain, or both. The victim is led up the mountain to the holy tree and bound to the tree and left. Then the brute comes. That is why you angered Ungit just now, king, when you spoke of offering a thief. In the great offering, the victim must be perfect. For in holy language, a man so offered is said to be Ungit's husband, and a woman is said to be the bride of Ungit's son. And both are called the brute's supper. And when the brute is Ungit, it lies with the man, and when it is her son, it lies with the woman. In either way, there is a devouring. Many different things are said, many sacred stories, many great mysteries. Some say the loving and the devouring are all the same thing. For in secret language, we say that a woman who lies with a man devours the man. That is why you are so wide of the mark, king, when you think a thief or an old, worn-out slave or a coward taken to battle would do for the great offering. The best in the land is not too good for this office.
The holiness and horror of divine things were continually thickening in that
Mhm.
room.
So the king is worried about treason. He sticks a knife in the priest. Priest is okay.
Who stuck a knife to the priest again?
The king did.
Oh, yeah.
And the priest is unafraid by that. Drive it in, swift or slow. Be sure the great offering will be made, whether I am dead or living. I'm here in the strength of Ungit. And so Psyche, not the king, is the one who must be sacrificed. But the king is relieved, whereas Oriel is ready to lose her mind. And so she's beaten by her father. Until she passes out. So in the next chapter then, chapter 6, is the actual sacrifice has to happen. And Oreo is ready to give herself up in place of Istra. The king without a word came up to me, took me softly enough by the wrist and led me the whole length of the room to where his great mirror hung. You might wonder that he did not keep it in his bedchamber, but the truth is he was too proud of it for that and wanted every stranger to see it. It had been made in some distant land, and no king in our parts had one to match it. Our common mirrors were false and dull. In this you could see your perfect image. As I had never been in the pillar room alone, I had never looked in it. He stood me before it, and we saw our two selves side by side. Ungit asked for the best in the land as her son's bride, he said, and you'd give her that. He held me there a full minute in silence. Perhaps he thought I would weep or turn my eyes away. Last he said, now be off. Men can't keep pace with your moods today. Get the beefsteak for your face. The fox and I must be busy. So not just rejected by men or her father, now rejected by the gods. And her home is being filled with the smell of incense, sacrifices. Ungit had taken the house. The reek of holiness was everywhere.
Oh, damn, the animals, it's not a whole.
And Redivel wants to try and repent, make up for it. And she's threatened. So she goes to visit Istra and fights with the captain of the guard, who is kind enough and ends up allowing her to go in to say goodbye. Which takes us to chapter 7. And she ends up being comforted by her sister, more than comforting.
Mhm.
And there's this shift which was a kind of terror to Oriole. She said, "You make me think I have learned the fox's lessons better than you. Have you forgotten that what we are to say to ourselves every morning? Today I shall meet cruel men, cowards and liars, the envious and the drunken. They will be like that because they do not know what is good from what is bad. This is an evil which has fallen upon them, not upon me. They are to be pitied." She wants to forgive Ridaville as well. She pities Ridaville. So there's the quality of mercy and forgiveness in Psyche. Again, it's not just the ugliness on the outside for Oriole. There's a bit of an ugliness on the inside. She mirrors her father. Whereas there's a beauty both outside and in Psyche, right? The charity that she has in her is part of, so the fox says the virtues in person. And that seems to be true. And she has this idea that she's to be a bride. So again, her childhood desire has maybe prepared her for this moment. But she does have a doubt in the corner of her soul, supposing there were no God of the mountain, no holy shadow brute, but rather would just be tied to the tree and die day by day slowly. Not a bad thing to be worried about. But she recovers herself. The priest has been with me. I never knew him before. He is not what the fox thinks. Do you know, sister, I have come to feel more and more that the fox hasn't the whole truth. So again, the dawning of Lewis's understanding, right? Coming slowly, but surely. Oh, he has much of it. It'd be dark as a dungeon within me, but for his teaching. And yet, I can't say it properly. He calls the whole world a city, but what's a city built on? There's earth beneath and outside the wall. Doesn't all the food come from there as well as all the dangers? Things growing and rotting, strengthening and poisoning, things shining wet in one way, more like, yes, even more like the house of, yes, of Ungit. Doesn't the whole land smell of her? Do you and I need to flatter gods anymore? They're tearing us apart. Or, says Psyche, they are real gods, but don't really do these things. Or even, mightn't it be, they do these things, and the things are not what they seem to be? How, if I am indeed to wed a god? So there's this, the losing. And remember when Lewis says in his own story, you know, we lost our mother sooner. All the whispering in the house, all the illness. I think this is playing out in this scene. Oriole is already losing her sister before the event to this god, because Psyche is already willingly giving herself over to this. Whether this is a consumption, whether this is just murder, whether this is really a wedding to a god, she is giving herself to the event. She's giving herself to the gods. So again, we reflect Jesus in this. Nobody takes his life. He gives it up on his own accord freely. He lays down his life. Nobody takes it from him. That's gospel. John emphasizes that. And so Psyche is willingly offering herself, come what may.
Like, he almost seems like an angel in a way, like her.
Right.
And even in the end, how they write about her as a character, it's almost like she's like an angelic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
comparable.
Well, and again, goddess, right? Like there seems to be, whether she had the god's blood in her before, there seems to be this transformation as she gives herself, right? And again, Christianity, this sense of Christ becomes what we are so that we will become what he is.
Yeah.
Right.
Almost like virtue.
So Psyche recognizes this role that she has. You think it devours the offering. I mostly think so myself. Anyway, it means death. So the life that she knows is over. Oriel, you didn't think I was such a child as not to know that. How can I be the ransom for all gloom unless I die? And if I am to go to the God, of course it must be through death. That way, even what is strangest in the holy sayings might be true. To be eaten and to be married to the God might not be so different. We don't understand. There must be so much that neither the priest nor the fox knows. So again, we have the category of mystery here.
Kind of saying like to enter in, like kind of comparing God to the bride, like the groom and the bride. It's kind of like you need to enter into death to enter
Right.
into heaven. It's kind of like death isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but it is exciting because you get to enter into the kingdom.
Right.
Or like for them, it's like being the bride of the God.
Yes, so she doesn't fear death as a result.
Brings up a longing for home, sort of that looking forward or past.
Right. Right. And so I don't think I drew attention to it, but there seems to be, it comes a little bit later, these pangs of joy that comes from the mountains as she goes up to get Psyche's bones. And of course, Oriel will not allow herself to be consoled. She will not think differently about Ungit, the gods. All she can think is this: I'm losing this thing that I love. So again, we have a little bit of the great divorce here, right? Things that we're not willing to give up.
The mother and the son.
You don't understand, not that kind of longing. It was when I was happiest that I longed most. It was on happy days when we were up there on the hills, the three of us, with the wind and the sunshine, where you couldn't see Glome or the palace. Do you remember? The color and the smell, and looking across at the gray mountain in the distance. And because it was so beautiful, it set me longing, always longing somewhere else. There must be more of it. Everything seemed to be saying, Psyche, come. But I couldn't, not yet, come. And I didn't know where I was to come to. It almost hurt me. I felt like a bird in a cage when the other birds of its kind are flying home. So yeah, we have Lewis's longing for joy, or the reality that joy points to, that the longing points to. We also have this Psyche feeling like a bird. The other bird character that we have in this story is the priest, who dresses like a bird.
Almost like a
Careful.
euphoric
You're
sort of.
falling.
I think
almost
that
like
was
a-
to the cat.
It's almost like a euphoric experiences of like when they're away from the sadness, like almost the depressing area of Glome. They almost have like an untime, like time didn't pass there. It's kind of just
Mhm.
enjoyment.
So time comes, chapter 8. I have a couple of minutes left here. I was determined to go with Psyche to the mountain and the holy tree, unless they bound me with chains. I even thought I might hide up there and set her free when the priest and the king and all the rest had turned to come home. Or if there's a real shout of brutes, I thought, and I cannot save her from it, I'll kill her with my own hand before I'll leave her to its clutches.
Trusting, wanted to take everything into her own hand. Even
Right.
even if it is like the reality, she doesn't want to give it up.
Well, and there may be a certain measure of if I can't have this, if I can't have her, nobody can.
Mm,
She's been badly beaten. And so she is not really fit. She clearly has a broken rib.
Mhm.
So she was able to see things, see Psyche, to see the procession getting ready. But Psyche has been made up. Ungid had taken the most beautiful thing that was ever born and made it into an ugly doll. And so she takes to her sickbed and she has ravings. There's a tangled diversity to the torture, yet also sameness. Everything changed into something else before you could understand it. Yet the new thing always stabbed you in the very same place. One thread ran through all the delusions. Now mark yet again the cruelty of the gods. There is no escape from them into sleep or madness, for they can pursue you into them with dreams. Indeed, you are then most at their mercy. The nearest thing we have to a defense against them is to be very wide awake and sober and hard at work, to hear no music, never to look at earth or sky, and to love no one. Now finding me heart shattered for Psyche's sake, they made it the common burden of all my fantasies that Psyche was my greatest enemy. All my sense of intolerable wrong was directed against her. It was she who hated me. It was on her that I wanted to be revenged. Sometimes she and Rideville and I were all children together, and then Psyche and Rideville would drive me away and put me out of the game and stand with their arms linked, laughing at me. Sometimes I was beautiful and had a lover who looked a little like poor eunuch Tyron or a little like Bardia. But on the very threshold of the bridal chamber or from the very bedside, Psyche wiggled and masked, and no bigger than my forearm would lead him away with one finger. And when they got to the door, they would turn around and mock and point at me. But these were the clearest visions. More often it was all confused and dim. Psyche throwing me down high precipices, Psyche kicking me and dragging me by the hair, Psyche with a torch or a sword or a whip pursuing me over vast swamps and dark mountains, I running to save my life, but always wrong, hatred, mockery, and my determination to be avenged. So there's things in there that will come to bear later. So we want to remember those. She heals and she begins to get up. She finds that after the sacrifice, things begin to get better. Rains come. Cattle are not so far gone. Peace is established. The plague is dried up. And of course, for the fox, this is just coincidence. It's not cause and effect. But of course, if the fox is right, there's no real beauty. And I think of letters to Malcolm, and he says, Malcolm, what do you gain when you trade the metaphor of God as this live wire, grabbing the live wire. And all you do is you make it so there's no mind there, just a cause and effect. Same sort of thing here. Fox, if this is true, this is just coincidence, then you haven't brought any comfort at all. Just means that we're days late and it was a needless death. So she's not saved by philosophy at this moment.
It's hollow comfort the fox brings.
Mm-hmm. So chapter 9, oh, it's 8:30 now. She sets off to get her sister's bones. But first she starts to train with Bardia. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Hopefully that brought some clarity.
Good night.